You just mentioned that it was that you needed this break after shooting the film and writing the film. And one thing I read about you, it was a quote from you that in the beginning you read the screenplay, but you thought it was too ambitious.
Yeah.
Can you explain that?
Well, I first started writing the script a decade ago, and basically I got to the middle of the second act and didn't feel particularly confident that the movie would get made as a first film. I grew up making movies in various capacities as a kid and a teenager. I grew up acting, but then I was editing films and producing projects and writing films. But this one, I knew enough about the process of raising money for a first film, and I'd seen much smaller films not, cross the finish line, so I just put it away. And then quite a few years later, I co-wrote a film for a filmmaker named Mona Fastvold, and she sort of convinced me to pick this back up and finish it. And then she breathed new life into it, and we actually finished it very quickly together. And at, she sort of said, well, why not? You should. We'll give it a try. And we were feeling kind of optimistic and confident because of other things that we were doing. We thought we kind of had a plan or a way that the film could come together. But then it took quite a... No, don't worry. But then it finally did take quite a few years more to get the film off the ground. There were quite a few different incarnations of the cast, and then, the film took so many years to get off the ground that people would have other commitments, or it was just impossible to get everyone in the same room at the same time to make it happen. And then, not only was the scope of the story and what was needed to make it convincing a difficult thing to put together, but we also knew that the film had to be shot on 35 millimeter, and that the film would have a massive orchestral score, which for a film that was under, a few $1 million is a tall order, because normally, the music for a film that's being made at that budget level is not, people aren't, it's not really where they're putting the money usually. So we had a much more unusual budget in terms of what we were spending money on and what we were choosing not to spend money on.
And why? Because it's interesting. It's one of my questions because you tell about the music. And when did you thought about the live orchestra and about working with Scott Walker?
I thought about working with Scott from the very beginning. I didn't know if he would say yes, because he'd only done one other film score that I know about anyway.
But you already knew him, or you only
I
knew
did
his
not
work?
know
Okay.
him. No, I was just a huge fan of his. And then I wrote him a lot of letters and sent them through various people. We sent a letter to his label, we sent some to his management, we sent some through a filmmaker that had made a documentary about Scott, and eventually, we got it in front of him, and then after we got it in front of him, he said yes very quickly.
You were excited.
I was ecstatic,
Yeah.
but that was 3.5 years before or 2.5 years at least before the movie got made. So then I was quite nervous for years that he would suddenly become unavailable the way that certain actors were and stuff, because he's always working on pretty grand projects himself, and he doesn't work on very many things at one time. Part of the reason the music is as accomplished as it is, beyond the fact that it's him writing the music, is that he devoted a lot of time to it. most film scores are written in a matter of weeks or maybe a couple of months. This was more of a year and a half kind of a thing. And so yeah, that was the there were all of these different sort of challenges, but at the end, you know, the right people were still there with the project, and we were able to move forward with it.
Why was the music so important for you?
Well, I guess I started thinking about the end at the beginning, which is to say that the end of the film, the scale of it sort of cracks wide open, and suddenly, you know, in the beginning of the movie you have a few characters, and then suddenly by the middle of the movie it's dozens of characters, and by the end of the movie it's thousands of people. So I knew that even if we were going to be shooting, you know, even if I had 2,000 extras, 2,000 extras is not as many as it sounds like. They have to be organized in a very particular way for it to have a big impact. So, and I didn't want to use any special effects to sort of duplicate the crowd or anything, because I just thought it would look quite ridiculous, like it would start looking like Hercules or something, I don't know. And so I knew basically that I had to rely a lot on the sound. And Scott was one of the only people I knew that was making music which was brutal enough and big enough to make the finale kind of function. But then I also knew that he has some more romantic, more kind of in the most positive sense of the word, melodramatic instincts that I thought would be really appropriate for the film as well. And I don't know, you know, he and I actually communicated about the music really easily. So the funny thing about working with people who are amazingly good at their job is that it's actually a very uncomplicated process. And we communicated mostly via email. You know, we met a handful of times to discuss the score. We met after he had completed a layout, just using, you know, samples and synthesizers. Synthesizers. and it's the lack of sleep. And so anyway, and so we listened to it, and then I took that and went and edited with it for a while, and then we made small changes based on what was working with the picture, and with there was one piece of music and one scene that we had to get rid of, but it was obvious it was not because of the music, it was because of the scene. It wasn't functioning. But other than that, the score is very close to the original layout, which is to say that the score is very close to his first try. And because we didn't have a lot of money, and even though we had a big budget for the score compared to other independent films, we had a very small budget for the film, for the music, compared to other films that have an orchestra of that size. So we didn't have a lot of opportunities to fuck up.
And did you, because tomorrow we will watch it with the live orchestra, and have you experienced that yourself earlier with the film?
Well, no, not exactly. When we recorded the score, it was done in 4 sessions. So we did strings, then horns, then percussion and strings again. So it was like this is the first time I will ever see the score played in one piece.
Ah, it's for you the first
time. Yeah,
time
so
as
it's
well.
quite amazing.
Yeah, it is. Well, I'm very curious what you feel about it. In Venice, you won the best director prize, right?
Yeah.
I've spoken to a lot of directors the past week, and they all said that during shooting, then you don't really have to guide the actors anymore, since they just do what has been asked. I don't know yet if I believe it completely, especially in your case, since you had to direct a child.
Yeah.
Tom Sweet, how was that?
Well, in my case, I can't really, like, in terms of in terms of the characterization, or like the tone of the characterization, of course the actor, it's like a song they've learned, and then they keep singing it over and over and over again, and so of course they come every day they arrive at set, they're more and more confident about what they've learned to do. But I couldn't really just shoot them because of the nature of the choreography in the movie. There's a lot of beats. I mean, the film is primarily shot in long sequence takes, and so of course you can never stop communicating. But that was just the nature of this movie. I think that if I was doing something which was less formal, then maybe I would be able to have less of a dialogue with them. But I don't know if I'd want to. I mean, everyone's different. Some people like to just put people in a room together and see what happens. But it's not really the way that I work.
And how was it for Tom? Because what age is he?
He was 9 years old when we shot, and he's 10 now. He had just turned 9 when we shot the film. He was actually, kids are quite interesting because, you know, especially if you cast the right kid, they don't come with too many preconceived notions about what something is supposed to be. So they're not resistant to the idea of, you know, I remember, for example, there's a point in the movie towards the end of the film where the boy starts screaming at his mother. He starts repeating a phrase over and over and over and over again. Now, of course, an adult actor would say, but why am I repeating it over and over and over again? Won't it be bizarre, or won't it feel wrong? But if you tell a kid to do it, they just do it. And that's interesting because I think the style of performance I'm most interested in is this kind of Bressonian style of performance where you have characters that are sort of just an empty vessel for the audience to project themselves onto. And so working with a kid, it's much easier because they're not trying to indicate anything about what the character is supposed to mean. And I think that if you have actors which are trying to tell you something about their character, and then you have a movie trying to tell you something, it's like it becomes too much in a way. And I think it's more interesting for the film to indicate something about the characters, and for the characters to be a bit more what's the word, in sync with that. I mean, like, so I mean, you know, acting for the stage is the most pure form of performance. But when you're acting in a visual medium, and when you're cutting up the time and the rhythm of the way that lines were actually delivered in real life, it suddenly becomes a director's medium and not the actor's medium. And that's something that, as I can say that having grown up as an actor and having acted for many people, that was something I understood very early on, that I would be able to give them a lot, but ultimately it was in that person's hands to make it good or not. And I watched performances I did for different people, and I knew that it could be better, or I could see that they gave the best version of what I actually did, and so So yeah, it's just, you know, everyone feels differently about those things.
And have you, because your child has been born during the process,
Yeah.
and wasn't it a bit contradictory that you have a child and this new life and it's so full of innocence, and on the other side you have Prescott and his
Yeah.
route in life?
I mean, I guess I never felt that the film was a kind of literal psychological breakdown of a person. It's the reason the character is not a real person. I mean, it's a completely fictional characterization. So, I I always thought of the character as being like part of a fable. And so my relationship to him was a more poetic kind of rendering of the theme. I mean, the character is supposed to announce the theme of the film more than it's not a film where you're supposed to be analyzing or breaking down what he's doing in a very docudrama kind of way.
So you don't think that now there's not somewhere in the world now a little Prescott walking around who will start?
Yeah, of course. I mean, in a lot of different shapes, sizes, and forms. I mean, of course. I mean, we live in one of the scariest moments so far in the history of human beings. I mean, which is just a fact. And it's not because we're more violent than we ever have been before. It's just that we have new ways of announcing that violence to the public, so it's a very uncertain moment we live in. It's a transitional period until people start to figure out brand new ways of fighting against a certain kind of indoctrination, which is something that this film is really about. Indoctrination, and about at what point a poisonous idea is introduced into the bloodstream and how it manifests.
We have to close, otherwise you're late for your next interviews. Thanks for your time.
No problem. Thanks very much.
You're
I
welcome.
appreciate it.
You're welcome.